In 2025, Amazon didn't just shift warehouses. It triggered a global economic earthquake. The spark, a signature, one executive order from President Donald Trump unleashed tariffs so steep they sent shockwaves through global commerce. Suddenly, the world's largest online retailer, responsible for 40% of America's e-commerce, was cornered. Trump's new policy slapped a blanket 10% tax on all imports, and the punishing 145% tariff on goods from China. For Amazon, this wasn't politics. It was survival. Within weeks, the company tore up $13 billion in supply chain contracts. It rerouted shipments from California to Mexico. It poured billions into factories in Vietnam and logistics hubs in India. What began as a tax on foreign goods became an exodus from the American economy. Ports in Los Angeles and Long Beach, once the beating heart of U.S. trade, fell silent. Tens of thousands of jobs evaporated. And the ripple effects didn't stop there. Retail giants like Walmart and Target began sounding alarms. Prices surged. Shelves went bare. Families struggled. This isn't just a supply chain story. It's the unraveling of America's grip on global trade, right before our eyes. The shockwave. Amazon powers 40% of all U.S. e-commerce, built on speed, efficiency, and cheap global trade. But in April 2025, Trump's tariff shattered that system. A blanket 10% tariff on all imports, and a crushing 145% tax on Chinese goods, sent shockwaves through Amazon's global network. Suddenly, everyday essentials like smartphones and clothing saw a 25% spike in costs. Amazon had two choices: eat the losses or raise prices. Instead, it chose a third: escape. In just 60 days, it launched a $13 billion overhaul, shredding contracts, abandoning U.S. ports, and rerouting its empire to Mexico, Vietnam, and India. Experts called it economic warfare. But for Amazon, it was survival. And for America's supply chain dominance, it was the beginning of the end. The Great Shift. Amazon's response to Trump's tariffs wasn't just strategic, it was existential. Faced with skyrocketing import costs and a supply chain in crisis, the company made a high-stakes decision: abandon U.S. ports and build a new global path forward. No longer could Amazon rely on traditional entry points like Los Angeles and Long Beach. These once bustling ports became liabilities, blocked by red tape and buried under tariffs. So, Amazon pivoted, fast and hard. Cargo ships were rerouted, contracts shredded. Instead of docking on the West Coast, shipments began flowing into Mexico, bypassing U.S. tariffs entirely. In Tijuana and Monterrey, billion-dollar logistics hubs began to rise, massive fulfillment centers, truck depots, and warehouses, all designed to move goods swiftly across the border by land, sidestepping sea-bound import taxes. But the shift didn't stop there. In Vietnam, Amazon ramped up manufacturing deals, tapping into the country's booming export sector, up 18% in just 1 year. In India, new partnerships flourished, with Amazon investing heavily in electronics, textiles, and logistics infrastructure, drawn by low labor costs and favorable trade policies. These countries weren't just cheaper, they were smarter options. No 145% tariffs. No regulatory chaos. Just open doors and eager governments ready to welcome Amazon's business. The company redefined its map, not around the US, but around economic efficiency, speed, and survival. In doing so, it created an entirely new global supply chain, one that no longer centered on America. This was more than adaptation. It was a deliberate retreat from a country that had become too expensive, too unpredictable, and too risky to anchor Amazon's future. The fallout at home. Back in America, the effects were immediate and brutal. The moment Amazon pulled the plug on US ports, the shockwave hit hard. Not in Washington, not in Wall Street, but in the blue-collar veins of California's coast, in Long Beach, in San Pedro, in Wilmington. The port of Los Angeles, the largest container gateway in North America, saw a sudden and staggering drop, a 22% plunge in container traffic, according to Reuters. Not over 5 years, not even over one, in just a matter of months. That 22% wasn't abstract. It wasn't theoretical. It meant real ships didn't dock. Real containers didn't unload. Real paychecks didn't come. Behind every shipping manifest is a human life. And when those manifests vanish, so do the livelihoods. Truck yards emptied. Dispatchers sat staring at blank boards. Drivers used to running 2, 3 loads a day now begged for even one. The logistics rhythm, the endless motion of America's supply chain, slowed to a crawl. And then stopped. Inside vast warehouses, lights dimmed. Conveyor belts froze. Forklifts gathered dust. Hourly workers who kept Amazon's last-mile empire running were told to go home, some temporarily. Others for good. Longshoremen, the backbone of West Coast commerce, lined up outside union halls, not for work, but for answers. Many had worked the docks for decades. Now they found themselves facing a job market that didn't need them anymore. Every 10% drop in port activity translates into 5,000 lost jobs. With a 22% fall, that's over 11,000 workers, and that's just at the port. Zoom out, and the toll multiplies. Because ports don't operate in a vacuum. They feed entire ecosystems, mechanics, freight forwarders, caterers, janitors, even IT staff who keep tracking systems online. And when that machine grinds to a halt, the fallout spills into the community like a flood. In Long Beach, lunchtime diners once packed with dockworkers now sit empty, neon signs flickering over locked doors. Bartenders pour fewer drinks. Servers take fewer tips. Grocers see fewer carts filled. Retail storefronts, already fragile from years of e-commerce pressure, begin to fold. Clearance signs become permanent fixtures. Lease signs hang in windows for months, untouched. And then, the shock hits the most vulnerable places, schools. With parents losing income, some families move away in search of work. Others simply can't afford supplies, after-school programs, or even lunch fees. Local districts, funded by sales and property taxes, see budgets shrink. Layoffs follow, programs disappear, teachers are left scrambling, not for lesson plans, but for basics. Some even begin working second jobs to stay afloat. And yet, the demand for goods hasn't disappeared. Americans still shop, still order online, still consume, but the flow of products, once routed through California, has found new arteries in Mexico, Vietnam, and India. The goods still come, just not through American hands. This is the paradox. Demand remains, but the supply chain has redrawn its borders. And with that redrawing, a brutal new truth emerges. Entire American regions can be economically severed, not through disaster or disinterest, but through pure efficiency. This isn't just economic fallout. It's strategic abandonment. What we're witnessing isn't a collapse. It's a quiet bypass. And the communities built on global trade are being left behind. Not because they failed, but because they became too expensive. Too complicated. Too slow. This is what happens when global companies stop waiting for Washington to fix trade policy and start building their own world. One where Long Beach is no longer a gateway, but a dead end. Retailers under fire. Amazon wasn't the only giant scrambling for cover. Across the American economy, the aftershocks of Trump's 2025 tariffs rippled outward, hitting retailers at the front lines of American life. Walmart, long the king of affordability, issued an urgent warning. Consumer prices were climbing, fast. A 12% increase in the cost of goods was just the beginning. From canned soup to sneakers, from socks to school supplies, nothing was spared. And that pain trickled straight down to the checkout counter. Target followed with its own grim update. Their supply chain, once a model of efficiency, was in disarray. Electronics disappeared from shelves. Kitchen appliances were backordered for months. Essential home goods were rationed, restocked in smaller quantities, and sold at higher prices. Home Depot, the lifeblood of America's builders and renovators, faced a wrenching shortage. Key items like power drills, plywood, paint, and even nails became scarce. Entire product lines vanished overnight, crippling contractors, slowing home repairs, and stalling small construction firms across the country. Even the toy aisle was under siege. Mattel, the century-old maker of Barbie, faced a manufacturing meltdown. Their suppliers, many located in China and Southeast Asia, could no longer ship affordable components due to the 145% tariff spike. The result? Production delays, rising prices, a future where a Barbie doll may cost 40% more than it did just a year before. But this crisis wasn't just about products. It was about people. Behind every price tag was a household struggling to keep up. A Consumer Reports survey uncovered a grim reality. 30% of low-income families cut back on groceries in 2025, not by choice, but by necessity. Parents began skipping meals. Mothers made a gallon of milk last a week. Kids wore shoes a size too small. Single parents rationed school supplies, cutting back on essentials just to stretch one more week of groceries. This wasn't inflation caused by natural forces, it was a policy-induced economic emergency. The very tariffs meant to defend American workers were crushing the same communities they were designed to protect. For a working-class family, a 12% rise in household costs wasn't a number on a spreadsheet. It was $50 less for gas, $100 less for medication, $200 less for school supplies or winter coats. Middle-income households, those barely scraping above the poverty line, fared no better. As costs rose and wages remained stagnant, the gap between need and affordability widened. Small businesses also took a hit. Local mom-and-pop shops, who relied on affordable wholesale inventory, suddenly found themselves priced out of competition. Many were forced to raise prices, cut staff hours, or shut the doors entirely. And in this growing storm, consumer confidence, the heartbeat of America's $25 trillion economy, began to flatline. Retailers cut projections. Job listings slowed. Hourly workers saw shifts reduced or contracts not renewed. The result, a looming retail recession, quietly spreading across malls, shopping centers, and main streets. Even Wall Street took notice. Stock prices for Walmart, Target, and Home Depot dipped as analysts projected slower growth, lower margins, and a shrinking middle class with less to spend. By late 2025, economic analysts warned of an irreversible trend. If tariffs remained in place, the average US family would face $1,000 more in annual expenses, and retail prices could surge another 15 to 20% by mid-2026. For some, that means fewer vacations. For millions, it means deciding whether to heat the house or fill the fridge. This wasn't just a supply chain collapse. It was an unraveling of the social contract, the silent promise that a full-time job would provide a decent life. Now, that promise was breaking, receipt by receipt, paycheck by paycheck. And behind it all, one policy decision, a single stroke of the presidential pen, was rewriting how Americans live, shop, and survive. The global reordering. As America tightens its grip through protectionist policies, the rest of the world loosens up and accelerates. While US ports slow to a crawl, Mexico's economy is roaring to life. On the dusty outskirts of Tijuana and Monterrey, something extraordinary is happening. Where there were once empty lots and quiet industrial parks, now stand towering fulfillment centers. Massive Amazon warehouses, glass, steel, and data, sprawling over hundreds of acres. Inside, thousands of workers move with precision. Conveyor belts hum, drones charge silently in rows. This isn't just logistics, it's a new frontier of commerce. And it's growing, fast. Amazon's footprint in Mexico expanded by 35% in just 1 year. A surge fueled not by choice, but by necessity. Tariffs made importing goods to the US by sea nearly impossible. So Amazon turned to land, and Mexico became the answer. With low labor costs, favorable trade terms under the USMCA, and direct highway access into the American heartland, it became the company's new gateway to North America. But the shift didn't stop at the border. Across the Pacific, two other giants were rising. In Vietnam, the story is equally staggering. A country once known for textiles is now producing electronics, appliances, and consumer goods for the world. Amazon's pivot away from China funneled billions into Vietnamese factories. In 2024 alone, Vietnam's exports grew by 18%, a number unheard of in modern trade history. New highways cut through rice fields. Container ships leave Haiphong at record rates. Foreign investment surged, and the country transformed into a cornerstone of the new global supply chain. And then there's India. With its vast population and surging tech economy, India offers Amazon something even more valuable: scale. Factories in Chennai, Bangalore, and Mumbai are churning out everything from smartphones to smart speakers. India's logistics sector is now growing at 12% annually, thanks to a wave of investment not just from Amazon, but from dozens of American and European firms desperate to relocate supply chains. This isn't temporary, this is structural. Vietnam, India, and Mexico aren't just stopgaps to weather a trade storm. They are the new pillars of production, distribution, and profit. And while American ports rust, their ports shine. Ships once destined for Long Beach now dock in Da Nang. Containers rerouted from Los Angeles now flow through Veracruz. Warehouses in Ohio go quiet, while Mexican hubs run 24/7. The economic gravity of global trade is shifting. And it's shifting away from the US. These nations are no longer followers. They're strategic players in a new world order, claiming jobs, contracts, and influence that once belonged to America. New trade corridors are forming, from Vietnam to the Philippines, from Mexico to Brazil. New alliances are strengthening. India with the EU, Vietnam with ASEAN, Mexico with Pacific partners. Meanwhile, US influence in the trade arena is quietly receding. Trump's tariffs, meant to weaken China, have instead empowered a new generation of global competitors. And Amazon, once the crown jewel of US logistics, has become the architect of this new order. Its $13 billion supply chain pivot has redrawn the map of global commerce, brick by brick, port by port. The question now isn't whether the US can reclaim its dominance, it's whether the world even needs it to. Strategy or stumble, dash. When President Trump launched his 2025 tariff blitz, the mission was clear. Bring back American jobs, reignite US factories, reclaim lost manufacturing power. But what happened instead was a global redirection. Rather than flooding the Midwest with new assembly lines, the tariffs sent production and profit running for the exits. A report from the Peterson Institute for International Economics delivers the harsh math. US businesses are now paying over $50 billion more each year just to stay afloat under the weight of increased import costs. That's money not spent on American jobs, not spent on US factories, not spent in towns that desperately needed it. Meanwhile, according to the Wall Street Journal, US imports plummeted 15% in the first half of 2025. And that decline isn't just a number. It's containers no longer arriving. It's warehouses sitting idle. It's jobs vanishing in silence. Trump's plan backfired. Instead of revitalizing domestic industry, the tariffs pushed companies into survival mode, accelerating the departure from US dependence. Major retailers, manufacturers, and tech giants all raced to restructure. And in their wake, America's influence over global trade began to erode. China, originally the target of Trump's 145% tariff sledgehammer, pivoted quickly. Beijing fast-tracked new trade deals with Europe, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, reinforcing a web of commerce that excluded the United States. Instead of being weakened, China became more globally embedded, its supply lines no longer chained to the US market. And as China courted new allies, US port cities, once gateways to global goods, began slipping from relevance. In Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Savannah, shipping volume fell. Storage yards sat half empty. Crane operators reported fewer shifts. The rhythm of trade that once pulsed through American ports began to flatline. With every contract Amazon signs in Vietnam, or every warehouse it opens in Mexico, the US loses a piece of its leverage. Trade routes are being redrawn. Global supply chains are being rerouted. And the new map leaves America on the sidelines. Trump's strategy was to isolate China. But in the process, he isolated America. Instead of becoming the global factory floor again, the US became a high-cost destination companies are now eager to avoid. And the impact ripples beyond economics. As the US exits key trade routes, it loses not only jobs and tax revenue, but also diplomatic influence. Where once American ports dictated terms, now Hanoi, Mumbai, and Monterrey command attention. This is more than a stumble. It's a structural shift, an unintended realignment of global commerce. And unless US policy adapts quickly, it risks watching the world move on, without it. The political cost. With the 2026 midterm elections on the horizon, the economic toll of the tariffs is becoming a political wildfire. Across America, working families are feeling the squeeze. From grocery aisles to gas pumps, from clothing racks to utility bills, the cost of living is quietly climbing. These were the very voters Trump's trade war aimed to protect. The factory workers, the middle-class families, the backbone of America. But now, many of them are asking, protected from what? According to retail analysts, if tariffs remain, prices on essential goods could surge up to 20% by early 2026. That means an average American family could spend an extra $1,000 per year, without earning a dollar more. For millions living paycheck to paycheck, it's the difference between getting by and going under. And it's not just about shopping carts, it's about job security. With consumer demand faltering, the National Retail Federation projects a 10% drop in spending, which could erase 500,000 retail jobs by mid-2026. Cashiers, warehouse workers, delivery drivers, people who once thrived in a growing economy are now living under a cloud of uncertainty. In towns dependent on big box stores or shipping hubs, layoffs have already begun. Incomes are shrinking, mortgage payments are being missed, and community programs are being cut as tax revenues fall. The political backlash is mounting across swing states. If this story opened your eyes, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We're tracking how these global shifts impact you. Don't miss what comes next.